All right. Okay. Did you get your hellos out of the way? Yeah. On this blustery day, it was blowing so hard out there, even messed up my hair and Tom's. So, it didn't mess yours up. All right. This is week 12. It's hard to believe. We've been doing this for 12 weeks now. And today, we're going to finish up. We're going to go all the way from Genesis and take you home to Malachi. And then next week, we're going to do a review of this whole thing. And then I think we're even bringing back one of the characters to to help us talk story next week as we walk through this whole thing, okay? So, it's hard to believe. 12 weeks, we've gone through it. So, by now, you should know the walk-through. You should know Old Testament history. I want to give you just a little tool that you can use when you go to date things in the Old Testament, all right? So, we talked about Genesis all the way. The first 11 chapters, remember, were creation, right? The fall, the flood, and then the nations. And then we go into chapter 12. Over here, this is the timeline, not the map. And we start over here with Abraham. And if you take Abraham and you go about 2000, right? 2000 BC, that's Abraham. You move down about 500 years to Moses, and we get 1500 BC is Moses. You go down another 500 years to the kings in the United Kingdom. The middle of that kingdom, about David, is about 1000. And if you go to the 500, then you're looking at what we're looking at today, Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, all right? And right after that is Malachi. So if you use those time frames, you're able to pinpoint just about where people fall, at least within a good guess. So if I said Ruth, where would Ruth fall? Where would she fall? She would fall probably near who? Huh? We keep going down this way, right? So she'd fall probably closer to David, somewhere in that realm, right? So we back up just a little bit, so she's prior to that. So she's, somewhere near maybe 1200 BC, 1100 BC, somewhere in there. You can make a big guess. How about someone like, Samuel, where would he fall, right? So he makes it easy, right? All right? Okay, so as you sit through and you think of that, just remember 2000, 1500, 1000, 500. And if you don't like names, you can put events on there. Right? So you got Exodus at 1500, right? You got the divided or the United Kingdom at 1000, and then 500 you have just about the time the Bible's closing out. So if you use that, you can kind of just get in the ballpark, and then you can figure out where things fall, and then it's not like, well, I have no clue where it fell. You can also do that with the books of the Bible. Then you can start putting them in about where, if I say Daniel, where would Daniel fit? He would fit in the captivity time, right? So that's 70 years. So somewhere after 586, right? In that particular era, all right? Okay, so let's get started. We did the first part of Genesis. I'm not going to walk again. I'm going to go just kind of point over here, all right? So we're going to go over here to the Sinai Peninsula, to the Persian Gulf. We dip our finger in the water. We get salt. Tigris, Euphrates, up the Euphrates to Haran. Haran is barren, like Abrahamic Covenant, LSB, land, seed, blessing. Terah dies. They go to the Promised Land. In the Promised Land, over here, Abraham has two sons. There they are, Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac has two sons. They are hairy and smooth, right? Jacob and Esau. Jacob has 12 sons, one daughter. The daughter is Dinah, right? And then the son we're interested in is the one with the coat of many colors, so Mr. Joseph. Joseph sold into slavery, comes to Egypt. At Egypt, he works for the captain of the guard named Potiphar, right? Potiphar, falsely accused of rape, thrown in jail. He rises to the second command to Pharaoh, becomes the vizier. Famine in the land, Israel comes down. Joseph dies, and then what happens? bondage, 400 years of bondage. At the end of those 400 years, God raises up a deliverer. The deliverer is Moses. Let my people go. Pharaoh says, no. 10 plagues, cross the Red Sea, back to the Sinai Peninsula, all right, to Mount Sinai, where they receive what? They receive the law and the instructions for the tabernacle, all right? Then they come to Kadesh Barn, or Kadesh Barnea, an oasis down here. They send out, I'm not doing the, 12 spies, right? I'm counting my earlobes. 12 spies. 10 say, no. 2 say, go. Who are they? Joshua and Caleb. Because of that, they wander another 40 years. They come back to the east side of the Jordan River, where the book of Deuteronomy takes place. Moses dies. God raises up General Joshua, right? Joshua with Israel crosses the Jordan River, and they go and they fight the battle of Jericho. They take Ai, they go south, they go north, and then divides the land among all the tribes. Then Joseph dies. When Joseph dies, 400 years of judges, okay? At the end of the 400 years, God raises up the last judge, first prophet, a man named Samuel, right? And he anoints the first king, who is Saul, all right, who has no heart. And then David, all right, David has a whole heart. And then we have Solomon, who has a half heart. And the reason is Solomon started out great, but late in his life, he went down the wrong path. At the end of that time, the kingdom explodes. Boom, the big bomb, right? So Jerry in the north, Ray in the south. Ray bomb, Jerry bomb. The north is Israel. How many kings in Israel? 19. How many good kings? 0. 722 BC, the Assyrians come. They take them. They're gone. We haven't heard of them since, right? The southern kingdom, how many kings there? 19 kings, 1 queen. All right. How many good ones? 8. So there's 8 good ones. All right. At the end of that time, 586, actually starting in 605, Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he takes the southern kingdom. They're taken into captivity for 70 years, right? 70 years. And that's where we kind of ended up last week. At the end of the 70 years, they come back to the land. They come back in 3 waves. So you remember, the first one would be to remember is Zerubbabel. And you can go the rubble, and you go rubble. So that's what he came back to, the rubble of the land. And what did he do? He helped build the temple. Took a while. They built the temple. And then the next person to come back, Ezra. Ezra comes back, and Ezra builds up the people. So you remember this. He calls the people back to worship of God. The last one to come back is the shortest guy in the Bible, Nehemiah. All right? So if you remember Nehemiah building the walls to their knees, right? They finally build the walls. Yeah, well, okay, I heard that too. Yeah. All right, he's shorter. I'll give you that one, okay? But anyway, just remember, Nehemiah building the walls. After that, basically, the Bible closes. And it's silent for about 400 years until we have one in the wilderness calling. The interesting thing is the last book of the Bible, if you go look at over there, is the last minor prophet is a guy named Malachi. And his whole prophecy at the end is, after all that God did, after all the captivity and all, and he brought you back to the land. The good thing about the captivity, what that did for the Israelites, is it did 2 things. One, synagogues sprung up because they didn't have the temple, so they had rabbis teaching. But the second thing is they no longer believed in idols. Since that time, Israel has not had idols in the land. But Malachi said, even though there's no idols in the land, he said there's indifference. Just a short time after they come back, there's indifference. He challenges the priests and says, hey, you need to get back to calling the people back, as Ezra did, back to worship. And he tells the people, stop withholding your tithes. Stop stealing from God. And oh, by the way, all right, you need to get back to the law. So a short time after that, the people fell back in. And then the last thing he warned them about was the culture. Don't fall into the culture and don't get indifferent. Kind of like, what he may be saying to our church today. Let's get back to God. All right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor also. So, this morning, I actually stumbled across a guy who was there building the walls. And so he's going to come share with you part of that story.
Yeah. Doesn't get much better than this. Mini donuts with powdered sugar. Oh boy. Just like kissing my old lady, you know? Exactly the same every single time, but just the way I like it. Hey, kid. Yeah, you. Yeah, what you got in your lunchbox today? Peanut butter and jelly? You do? Hey, what? Did your mom put a little note in there on a napkin, too, with a little bit of a lipstick on it? Oh, I'm just messing with you, kid. We're a little rough and tumble here on the wall division, but you'll get used to it. It's your first day, huh? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can tell. It's your eyes. Way too alert for this time of day if you've been working here for a couple of weeks, let me tell you. But at lunchtime, most of us can hardly keep our eyes open, you know? I mean, thank God for the Sabbath. If it wasn't for one day of rest a week, I don't know if my wife would ever recognize me. What do you mean, why are we working such crazy hours? Where have you been, kid? Fly fishing down on the Nile or something? Good night. You farm kids really are out of the loop, aren't you? Well, don't worry. I'll get you up to speed. 10-hour shift on wall building, then an 8-hour shift on guard duty, and then 6 hours sleeping, if you're lucky. Every single day. Yeah. It's crazy, I know. And lately, I've just been sleeping right here next to the wall and all my work stuff. It's the only way you can get enough rest. The reason we've been working such crazy hours is because, if you haven't noticed, we are working on rebuilding the walls of the city. This is a big deal. This isn't no, memorial fountain, a storage tower or something. This is like as important a construction project the city can have in this day and age. My dad always said, if your city don't got walls, it don't got nothing. No walls, no security. No security, no Jerusalem. No Jerusalem, no people of Israel. That's the way I see it, at least. But, the other reason we're working such crazy hours is there are some people out there who do not want us to get these walls built, okay? I'm getting that blank stare from you again, kid. Are you telling me you do not know who Sanballat is? Oh, good night. You are a blissful idiot, aren't you? Well, don't worry. I will rid you of that bliss. Sanballat is the leader of the Samaritans. Those were the half-Jews that never really left during the exile. And he thinks he's Mr. Big Shot now. He's one of the Persian governors, but he acts like he's a king, So because of that, the fact that the real king, King Artaxerxes, back in Persia, is allowing Nehemiah to come back here and lead this wall building project, it just drives this guy absolutely nuts. He sees these walls we're building as a symbol of our independence and a sign that he is losing power. He doesn't like that. So Sanballat is doing everything he can to try to bully us into stopping doing this project. He throws threats to Nehemiah. He tries to do fake letters and trick Nehemiah. He tells us he's going to send his army over here and attack us, everything. That's why I got that 8-hour shift on watch duty right after my 10-hour shift building the wall. Day and night, 24/7, we got armed guards standing below the work crew at all times. Hey, and take a look at this. You're going to want to get one of these bad boys on your tool belt, kid. Nehemiah's orders. Every single worker needs to have a weapon. Oh, no. He needs to have a tool in his right hand and a weapon in his left hand at all times, You never know when you're going to need to go from pushing a hacksaw to hacking a head off, Yeah. Oh, boy, you're looking a little pale, kid. You sure you're feeling all right? You want a donut? Usually perks me just right up, no? All right. It's probably all of that hacking the heads off kind of talk got you a little bit nervous, huh? Yeah, well, don't worry about it. You'll get used to it. Plus, hey, you'll feel a lot better when you get to meet Nehemiah. Man, that guy inspires some confidence, you know. Tough dude. Never really met someone like Nehemiah before. He's not afraid to knock some heads around if he has to. And he's definitely not afraid to stand up to Sanballat and all of his goons. But watch yourself. He is definitely not afraid to stand up to his own people either when he has to. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that you have no clue what happened here a couple nights ago. Am I right? Okay, good. I like telling stories, so I'm actually enjoying this break with you, kid. This was about 2 nights ago, and I had just gotten done with my 10-hour shift on the wall, was getting ready to go to watch duty, and Nehemiah was there, and he was overseeing the transition from all the people who were on work duty going to guard duty and vice versa, all right? So he's busy, he's super stressed out, got a million things on his mind, probably hasn't slept in days, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this dirty-looking guy comes and he throws himself down at Nehemiah's feet, and he starts blubbering to him about something or other. And I had seen this guy in the city before, okay? He's like dirt poor, he's dressed in rags, just skinny, skinny, skinny. He's just kind of your typical peasant trash that you got in every city, you know? And I thought, like, Nehemiah's got a million things better to do than listen to this guy. What right does he have to talk to Nehemiah, you know? Nehemiah doesn't need to listen to this guy just blubber and complain about his life all day long, you know? But Nehemiah did not just kick this guy away like I probably would have done. He listened to him. And he listened to when this guy told him that the taxes that King Artaxerxes was charging on the people of Israel were killing him. How this guy had to actually mortgage his farm just to be able to pay the taxes. And then the guy who's holding the interest, who's holding that mortgage and charging him an insane amount of interest, he can't pay that either. Apparently, this guy actually had to sell 2 of his daughters into slavery just last week to pay the interest on that loan. And then he's worried that next week he's going to have to sell one of his sons. Now, of course, that got Nehemiah upset, get most people upset, but Nehemiah was really steamed when he found out who the rich guy was that was charging the poor guy such an insane amount of interest. It was a fellow Israelite. Oh, yeah, I've seen Nehemiah upset before, but I have never, ever seen him like that. I mean, his hands were shaking, his face was red. There was this vein on his forehead that just looked like it was going to explode everywhere. You know, he was steamed. So we asked this guy, how many other people are in your same predicament? And the guy starts naming off person after person, all his friends, all his poor people who were getting squeezed by the rich guys and charged an insane amount of interest. So Nehemiah just goes charging off. He rounds up all of the rich guys from the city, gets them all together, and he just lets them have it, both barrels, you know, and Nehemiah can let people have it when he needs to let them have it. He told them that what they were doing was not just unfair, it was not just wrong, it was sin. They were breaking God's law. They were breaking the law that God had given to Moses and he had given to the people so many years ago. They can't charge their fellow Israelites interest. What were they doing? Didn't they know what got us in this predicament in the first place? See, if Nehemiah is convinced of one thing, it's this, that the security of our city right here does not depend on all of these walls that we're building. It depends on the strength of the God who is with us. We could have the biggest walls in the world, but if God wasn't with us, we'd still be in danger, you know? And on the other hand, if God is with us, then there ain't nothing that Sanballat or his goons or anybody else in the world could ever do to put us at risk. So that is why Nehemiah was so upset at those dudes. By charging the poor people such an unfair amount of interest, they were like thumbing their nose at God, the only God who could protect us. And trust me, you don't do that to Nehemiah's God, kid. Well, as it turns out, Nehemiah straightened those dudes out. They felt really bad about it. They decided they're just going to give all the farms back, forgive all the loans, no strings attached, no questions asked. That was that. Told you Nehemiah's a tough dude, huh? Oh, boy. Break's almost over, kid. Time to get back to the old wall. You know, believe it or not, I think that we're almost going to get done with this project probably in the next 2-3 days. Huh. Kind of hard to believe it when we started it 49 days ago. Yeah, just 49 days ago. Looks like Nehemiah's bet that God is stronger than Sanballat's going to pay off, huh? Oh, boy. Things are really looking up here in Jerusalem, you know? We got a temple built. We're going to have walls. It's like It's like we're going to be God's city again, you know? I like the sound of that. All right, hey, better finish that sandwich, kid. You need enough calories to get through the day, you know? First rule of construction. That's why I always keep those little donuts in that pocket there. Ever I start feeling a little bit down, just start popping one or two of those, I feel great. See you on the wall.
All right, now I think I can get through this. Well, I want to take a few minutes and outline some specifics that really happened during this time of the return of the exiled Jews to the Holy Land, and then I want to make a heartfelt application. The books of the Bible from this period, that cover this period, are Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. If you've been surveying the timeline down here, you'll see kind of a depiction of that on the screen here. The red column, the red panel that you have over there is the same here. Exile, and right over the top of that, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. In between Ezra and Nehemiah is Esther. And down below, then the three last writing prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Plus the last two verses of 2 Chronicles, if you want to put them in there. Now, when the last sentence is read in Nehemiah, which is a prayer, remember me, O my God, for good. That's the end of the Old Testament, as far as the history goes. The year right then would be about 420 BC. So I'm giving you some dates up here, a little time frame. You know, but that's sort of weird when you think about it, because if you're thumbing through your Bible, you're only just a little more than halfway through the Old Testament, and the history's over. And then, of course, you got the poetic books and the prophets, and those are almost as long as the history part. Well, after Nehemiah, then, as Don was sharing, there's a gap of what are called the 400 silent years until some locust-eating camel sweater guy comes up and he's baptizing in the Jordan River. He, in fact, is predicted in the last verses of the last prophet, and that would be the last book of our Bibles, Malachi. Now, I have yet to meet a Christian who was super charged up about learning how the Jews returned to the land after the exile. I don't think people were running around Tacoma this week or on the internet telling everybody not to miss FBC this Sunday because we're going to be talking about the return. I'm sure there was far more excitement this week about the return of Miss Everdeen and the Mockingjay. Well, don't worry, I don't take this personally. This section of the Bible really doesn't have a classic Bible story like David killing a giant or Elijah calling down fire from, on Mount Carmel on the wet altar, and we don't really have a good scandal going. Ezra and Nehemiah actually contain a lot of lists, which is just about as entertaining as the begats in Genesis. It's not easy to get excited about a verse, such as, after him, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired another section from the door of the house of Eliashib to the end of the house of Eliashib. You can almost pronounce the names. The only time this literature normally gets talked about is when the book of Nehemiah is cherry-picked for principles of leadership, which is a hot topic from time to time, especially among Americans who love efficiency and getting things done. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the interest is not actually in what's happening in Jerusalem 2,500 years ago. So my task is to try to get us out the door today with some better reasons for reading what are called the post-exilic books. Some of you look a little skeptical, like I was expecting you to get pumped up about the origins of the matzo ball during the Hyksos invasion of Egypt or something like that, which actually for a couple of you might be easier because you just love cooking shows. But anyway, be a skeptic if you want. Here's how it all happened. The Reader's Digest Cliff Notes version of this history. And so pay close attention because I'm going to do this in 500 seconds. That's 166 years, 3 seconds per year. Ready? Go. Time frame. Rewind to the beginning of the exile, 586. Jerusalem and the temple are brutally obliterated by the Babylonians. Say that 3 times as fast as you can. All the treasures of the palace are taken. All the treasures and vessels and the furniture of the temple are taken, pilfered. The people who aren't slaughtered in 586 are dragged kicking and screaming to Babylon. There they spend the next decades under the discipline of God. Of course, if they are older, they will not make it back. They're going to die in captivity. God intends for the land to rest for 70 years, just as he had announced through Jeremiah. God, in fact, is better than his word. At the return, the year is actually 538, less than 50 years of continuous exile. For his own reasons, as soon as Persia replaces Babylonia as the dominant world power, the Lord stirs up the heart of King Cyrus in his first year as the most powerful man on earth to do what? To send exiled Jews back to Jerusalem to build a house for God. Cyrus says any Jews who want to are permitted to return. That's our subject today, back to the land. Now, there are actually 3 parts to this return, as Don was sharing. Rebuilding the temple is just the first, then the rebuilding of the people, and then rebuilding the walls. 1, Ezra, chapters 1 through 6, year 538, event. The temple is rebuilt. Key leader, Zerubbabel. He's called a prince of Judah, since he was the grandson of Judah's evil king Jehoiachin, actually the great-grandson of good King Josiah. That would put him in the line of David of Judah. We know that he is in the genealogy of Jesus. Read Matthew 1, Luke chapter 3. This man leads the return to build the temple. He is called a governor, not king, since the king of Judah actually is Cyrus of Persia. Prophets. Haggai and Zechariah encouraged the building, actually after a 16-year delay, during which Zerubbabel and others are building their own houses. And here's how that happens. The delay has nothing to do with getting permits or passing inspections. Actually, the building started well. They build a proper altar so they can begin sacrifices, and they lay the foundation of the temple in the first 2 years, but then opposition comes from the settlers in Samaria, and so now it's 18 years into it, and there's just a foundation and no building. The prophets say, enough already, finish the temple. So they get going, 4 years of hard labor later, plus, and this is kind of a key thing, Darius, now they've got a new king up in Persia, Darius sends word that anyone who opposes the building will be impaled on a beam pulled out of his own house. The opposition ends. Funny thing. And so they begin to finish the temple. They do finish the temple in 516. They joyfully dedicate it. This is 70 full years after it was burnt down. This is usually called the Second Temple, if you're reading literature about this. So ends the first stage of the rebuilding, as recorded in Ezra 1-6. Excited so far, you skeptics? Stage 2, the people. Ezra 7-10, year 458. Now, there's a 58-year gap, during which, if you go up north, you're going to see Esther up there and Xerxes. She married King Xerxes, or King Ahasuerus, same guy. And she was instrumental, of course, in saving the lives of all her people still in exile. We're going to ignore those people. We're just talking about the return. But now it's 80 years that have passed since the very first group of temple builders returned with Zerubbabel, and, of course, they are all dead. The temple was restored and its worship, but now what about worshipers? And now they must people the temple with worshipers. The people are rebuilt. That's the event. Key leader, Ezra. The scribe Ezra, a descendant of Aaron, teacher of the law. He arrives from Babylon with a decree from King Artaxerxes, new leader in Persia, a new king. He commissions Ezra to establish the people of God under God's law. He has royal authority to prosecute judgment on people who disobey. A new wave of people return with Ezra on this 900-mile journey, carrying gifts that could beautify the temple. When they arrive in Jerusalem, however, plot change here, Ezra is told that the returned remnant that's living in Judea and Jerusalem has again started intermarrying with the idolaters of the land. The same old ugly lineup of Jebusites, Ammonites, Amorites, and Perizzites. Ezra sits appalled. He rips his robes. He pulls out his hair. He falls on his knees, and he cries out to God in shame for his people's sin. This is Ezra chapter 9. He knows that they have been given what he calls a brief moment of favor, this little reprieve from captivity. So he says, "For we are slaves, yet God has not forsaken us in our slavery." He confesses that in their old failures like this, God never punished them as much as they deserved, seeing that he let them come back to build a temple. But now, what will save them from being consumed by a God who has run out of mercy? "Behold, we are before you in our guilt, for none can stand before you because of this." At that point, as Ezra the priest weeps, people from all over, men, women, and children, come and weep with him bitterly. They call for a solemn assembly where they will put away their pagan wives. There they plan to covenant with God to live according to his ways. So 3 days later they arrive in the pouring rain. Sounds a lot like today. They sit trembling in the square before the temple. And there they plan for an orderly putting away of these wives. And so it is done. And the book of Ezra ends. To be continued in Nehemiah, the sequel. The excitement builds. Stage 3. Nehemiah 1 through 12. Year 445, 13 years have passed. Ezra is still in the people rebuilding business. This book will cover 25 years. But the big issue at the beginning is this defenseless city with broken down walls and burnt down gates. In this book, event. The walls are rebuilt. The work is actually done, as we've heard, in an amazing 52 days. Neighboring peoples tremble when they realize it was God that helped them do this. Key leader, Nehemiah. He's a guy that works in a menial but important job for King Artaxerxes, new king of Persia. He's the cupbearer. But he's not like Zerubbabel or Ezra. He's not from any noble or priestly stock, just an ordinary guy who cares deeply about Jerusalem, although he hadn't returned when Ezra went back. The only thing extraordinary about him is that God placed him in the palace, where he had access to a powerful king who trusted him. Result, a decree that empowered Nehemiah to do what? To help rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, plus materials. Despite persistent and clever opposition of guys like Sanballat and his right-hand man Tobiah, they do build the walls. It's done in 52 days, and now we have all three things: the temple, the people, and the walls. All is just as God had planned. Yes, but enter prophet Malachi. As Don was sharing, Malachi challenges the dead orthodoxy of the people. They may be living in greater safety, but they have entered into what I'll just call boredom. He tells them that God chose them as people to show his glory to all nations, but the way they are living, that's never going to happen. Maybe they are finally rid of obvious idolatry, but their lives just do not reflect the heart of God. Well, this is in the foreground as Ezra re-enters the picture in Nehemiah chapter 8. He stands on a wooden platform to read the law to the assembled people. The people stand in unison as Ezra opens the book. He and the priests help the people understand, those that don't understand the Old Hebrew. And the people respond by weeping. They are convicted of their sins. And yet they are told to rejoice because God is restoring them. He's forgiving them. In fact, Ezra says, the joy of the Lord is your strength. Rejoice. So he tells them to go out and celebrate with drinking and sharing food with those who have none. And so sin is confessed and covenants are reaffirmed. 10% of the people are asked to live in Jerusalem and build houses there. The wall of the city of David is dedicated. Choirs sing from the walls because God has made them rejoice with great joy. Nehemiah 12:43. The women and children also rejoice. And the chapter ends like this: and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. Wouldn't it be great if the Old Testament history actually ended with that? Well, now some application. Why do we need to read this? Well, we could do a lot of things with this. We could talk about how important it is to read and understand the Bible. We could talk about the importance of prayer, because there's tons of things about prayer in Ezra and Nehemiah. Or I could talk about how ordinary people like Nehemiah can do great things. Or how to deal with opposition. Or I could talk about God's sovereignty again, because that comes up over and over in the Old Testament. Here we have God moving the hearts of world rulers to benefit his people, to issue edicts that make possible what God wants. And it would encourage us a lot if we thought about, well, the rulers that God has given to us. Maybe they don't know God, but does that automatically mean that things will be harder for us and for the gospel? No. God's hand is with his leaders. Over and over it says, the hand of the Lord was with them. He is engaged with this return in a big way. And yet the return was nothing much to write home about. I could talk about how you can get discouraged when you don't get everything you might want or need from God. And here's Judah being returned to the land that was promised to them. Here's a new temple, and they have a fortified city where God can dwell among them again as his people. But think about it. People are in very small numbers. Compared with before, maybe 150,000 people, compared with formerly, millions when they just went out the gate of Egypt, and they are poor. And they are not free. They are slaves of the king of Persia. They're just one of 120 provinces of the vast stretches and reaches of the Persian Empire. And then they will again just be vassals of Greece and then of Rome until the day when Rome comes in and just destroys the whole city once again in 70 AD. Yeah, they're in the land, but it's just a postage stamp compared with the territory that they had under Solomon. God's nation is just 20 miles by 25 miles, 1/3 the size of our county. And true, they have a temple, but it's small and it's shabby compared to the first temple. The old men and the old priests who had been children and had seen the first temple, they weep loudly when they see how small the foundation of the new temple is. Well, even this temple will be ruined and desecrated by infidels, will be rebuilt in greater glory under Herod the Great, but then that will be destroyed once more in 70 AD. And it has no ark. There's no obvious Shekinah glory of God dwelling there as before. And yes, they do have walls around the holy city. But they have to actually conduct a lottery to force 1/10 of the people to join the leaders actually living inside Jerusalem. Those willing to do so are given a special blessing by all the people that get to stay in their own villages, in their ancestral homes. And of course, no king of their own. Maybe that's the biggest of all. No king to sit on David's throne. That is not permitted. Now, I could tell a little different story about this. Most of the exiled of Judah didn't bother to return for this. Hardly any came back. Now, this could also be a feature of God's sovereignty. I could tell you the story of what happened to these people, what we know about the dispersion of the Jews moving all over the world. The Greek Empire, of course, facilitated the movement of Jews into communities throughout the region, also during the Roman peace. Those Jews that ended up in Egypt created what became the Bible of the church, which was the translation of the Old Testament into Greek down in Alexandria in Egypt. Scholarly Jews did that. During the Roman peace, then, people of Jewish descent, these people from the deportation, people that were in the exile and didn't return, end up in those synagogues where Paul the Apostle ends up traveling, here and there, sharing the gospel to the Jew first and also to the Greek, to the Gentile. Did God all along have this in mind? So as Paul preached in a synagogue, there were oftentimes people prepared with the knowledge of the Old Testament. When they heard of Jesus, they embraced Jesus as their Messiah. And that's how people familiar with the Bible became the core of many infant churches. And then the gospel to the Gentiles. See, the dispersion of Jews ended up preparing the world for the reception and growth of the gospel. And that's pretty neat. So the question I have, then why does God bother to send anybody back to Jerusalem for such a meager facsimile of the real thing? What is this for? And here's what I want you to think about. It is for Jesus. Here's the reason to get excited about the return. No return, no Jesus. This is the place where all of his great-great-great-grandparents can be preserved as Jews. It's a place where the wall will be built, but even more, the law will be preserved there, so that it can be learned by this child Jesus as he grows up, ends up in the temple speaking with the Jewish leaders and the scholars. It's a place where a Bethlehem can eventually produce a promised child, as prophesied by Micah. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you will come forth from me one who is to be ruler of Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. It is a place where it can be said that God still keeps covenant with Abraham. I will give you a land, will bless you. And with David, your throne will not end. Well, no king but a son of David will occupy the throne of Jerusalem, and so he will come, to whom the promise was made. Well, meanwhile, what about the people and their daily lives in Judah? Because Jesus isn't coming for a long, long time. Well, the return was almost embarrassing. But I must say, the wait for Messiah and for any impressive glory will be long. The prophets, Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi, they all speak of that coming time. But then the prophets fall silent. They no longer speak. No prophets are sent. The date is about 430 when Malachi has said his God's final word. Now we're getting used to 400 years of silence. That would be like from now back to the Mayflower. That's a whole long time. God moves very slowly. Not exactly exciting. But see, that's my point. My point is that this is not very exciting. My point is that these people, with the lack of excitement, would just say, let's say this is our application, waiting faithfully. You want something to happen. You want something exciting to keep up your spiritual interest. More miracles, more prophecies, something new from God, something more exciting than a Bible history lesson. Get some fireworks going around here. But this has nothing to do with finding this story exciting. It's about a life, a faithful life, that it has to be lived when it's not exciting, when there is this long, long wait. And now I want you to groan because I left out one chapter. I said it was Nehemiah 1 through 12, but I never said anything about chapter 13, the last history chapter of the Old Testament. Well, here is Nehemiah 13. Once the walls are finished, Nehemiah can leave things in Ezra's hands, so Nehemiah returns to Persia. Evidently, takes up his old job in the palace. This is maybe 433. He will be gone for 13 years. And you have to wonder how things will go while he's gone. Now that the elements of the return are all in place, the temple, the people, and the walls, will it just be a great, wonderful time for the people of Judah? The long wait for Messiah, of course, is ticking away like the excruciatingly slow approach of Christmas for eager children who love all the gift giving without the credit card receipts. And there's Nehemiah returning in 420, the Old Testament's last chapter, the last year of the Hebrew Bible. How is everything? Well, when the cat's away, they say. First, he discovers that while he was away, somebody made a nice apartment for Tobiah, Sanballat's right-hand man, in the temple. It turns out he was married to the high priest's relative. But the problem is that not only is Tobiah an enemy of God's people, but he is also an Ammonite and was never to enter God's house according to the law. Deuteronomy 23. Furious, Nehemiah tosses out all Tobiah's furniture and returns the chamber to holy uses. That's number one. Two, then he finds out that no one has been providing for the Levites and the temple singers, so they've been forced to go back to their farms. Nehemiah confronts the leaders. Why is the house of God forsaken? He gets all the guys back, and then he puts in a support structure, and he encourages the people to give. And then, number three, he notices that people are working on the Sabbath day. In fact, they're peddling all kinds of goods and bringing them into Jerusalem. And he confronts the leaders again. He said, why don't you do something about this? Did not our fathers act this way, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on the city? Now, you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So he sets up guards to stop this from happening again, guards at the gates of Jerusalem. And then Nehemiah sees that intermarriage is happening again. And I love what he says about what he did. He says, and I confronted them, and I beat some of them and pulled out their hair. Here's Conan the cupbearer. And I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, you shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves. And then here is the key verse of this week. And I hate to even have to read this. He said this to these ones that were remarrying, did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin on account of such women? Among the nations there was no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Then he ends with this, shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God? Are we going to do this all over again? You can see how grieved he is. Déjà vu. And that's why the kingdom was divided and eventually was deported. And then finally, and remember, this is how the Old Testament Bible actually ends, Nehemiah has to chase away one of the high priest's sons. Why? Because he had married the daughter of evil Sanballat the Horonite. Makes you want to scream. In fact, I have a question up here. Why can't we just be faithful? This is how Nehemiah restored to order everything he found that was spinning back into chaos. He ends with the words, remember me, O my God, for good. And it means I did all I could do. It was probably not enough. Because when I leave again, what's going to happen? All I want is to be as faithful as I can and help others do the same. Why is it like this all over again? Déjà vu. And so we find one last time here at the end of the Old Testament, nothing's new until the king comes. Once again, we have proof that Israel needs a redeemer. Once more, you find out why the Old Testament needs a New Testament. You find out why BC has got to have an AD. And it's why we need a king too. Or you keep repeating the errors of your forebears. So I say to you, be faithful to your king, whether you're waiting for him or waiting for him to come back. And I know you can complain that mighty impressive things aren't happening in your life very often. I was driving here this morning, going past all these little congregations like ours that are around this city and just wondering what it would be like there. And as I've told you before, usually when I'm driving, I have John early in the morning. And so I'm praying out loud with John for each of these churches, that God will be with them. But I think about some of them that are discouraged. And they need to hear what Zechariah said in Zechariah 4 about despising the day of small things. Sometimes that's all you've got. But you wait for glory when the king comes. Or as Zechariah said, wait faithfully, fear not, and let your hands be strong. No, would it do any good if I sent Randy over to your house to beat you and pull your hair out? Because you're just bored. You're Orthodox, you got your doctrine straight, but it's far more exciting to, watch the Seahawks or the Sounders this afternoon. You came to church, but that's what you're really thinking about. Why? Has God done nothing for us? Why do we get discouraged? Why do we complain? Why do we just kind of go into coast mode? Do we not know our King? That's my question today. What if you had to wait 400 years? What if you were like a woman named Anna, who was born at the tail end of this silent time and who finally had the opportunity to see the king she was waiting for? And there was a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Asher. Now this is unusual because hardly ever did people after the dispersion, anyone from the northern kingdom, know their tribe, but she did. She was advanced in years, having lived with her husband 7 years from when she was a virgin, and then as a widow until she was 84 years old. She did not depart from the temple, worshiping with fasting and prayer night and day. And coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. She just stayed faithful and waited and served God, obeyed him, prioritized in her heart everything that had to do with him. I'm asking us to do the same. Do we not have good reason? Let's pray. Father in heaven, none of us have been required to go into exile because of our sins. Maybe not, at least in any literal way. Some of us maybe at times, because we have disobeyed you, have faced times of dryness, times of feeling like we weren't very close to you, we had failed you in some big way. But many of us have grown up in the land of your favor. We haven't known what it's like for your face to be against us. Yet the question is, how much is our face toward you? We come today, we're going to celebrate the table of Jesus Christ, the Lord's table. We are going to remind ourselves what was done for us. We're going to prepare ourselves for Thanksgiving this week as we think about the mighty and amazing things that you have done for people unworthy, such as us. And it's for this that we have gathered here to be reminded that we have every reason to be excited because there is a King named Jesus who loves us and gave his life for us. Thank you. Commit the rest of this time to you in the great name of Jesus our Lord. Amen. I want you to say